move to part 7, that is service inventory, the meaning and the context. Now you would be thinking that I have already discussed inventory in detail when we were talking about 8 forms of MUDA, and we have done this. So why I just chose this topic again, right? The reason would be clear once I just go ahead, because it's very important to understand inventory in service context, its meaning, how it changes. As you by now you understand that the basic purpose of lean, if I have to underline this thing, is that we have to increase the value by reducing the waste. And when we talk about reducing waste, we talk about reducing various kinds of waste, defects, transportation waste and all that. We have already discussed those, and MURA and MURI obviously. But when we the other 7 forms of waste almost remain same when we talk about services or manufacturing. But the waste of inventory takes a different meaning when we talk take it in terms of services and manufacturing. The reason being, when we talk about manufacturing, inventory is quite tangible. You know, these are the raw materials, this is work in progress, and these are the final goods, right? But in services, it's difficult and challenging first to understand the concept of inventory itself, and then to understand how to reduce this inventory. Fine, so that's why I had to take this topic, because all people who would be taking up my course or listening to these lectures are not working only in the manufacturing units. Fine, they can be from hospitality, they can be from hospitals, offices, banks, anywhere. So my endeavor is that everyone should understand and implement these simple concepts, and then they can enhance the value of the place they are working at, right? So the context of inventory in service is little difficult to explain and can take on different forms depending upon the context it is being used for. In general, inventory in service context cannot be equated with inventory in manufacturing context. As I have already told you that in manufacturing, inventory is quite tangible. So it's easy to measure, it is easy to reduce, because as in when we were talking about 8 forms of waste, I told you that once you start reducing the inventory levels, you start to see a lot of defects. And then if you start to remove those defects, you will yourself find out that the company, the organization would not feel the need to just store up so much inventory, because their processes will become smooth. But this is not as simple as in manufacturing as in services, because inventory in services is intangible and sometimes not even a real good that you can just check. Fine. So here I am going to give you 2 examples. As I just move ahead with these lectures, you will understand them very clearly. For now, I will just read these examples. So inventory in an emergency room, fine, in a hospital, might be people waiting. In this context, increasing patient flow means that we reduce inventory, that is people. In simple words, we serve more patients in more timely manner. But calling people inventory is something very inappropriate, right? And there are chances one could just misapply the term and reduce people in the inventory. So this is just the case in the hospital sector, where we just consider people as inventory, and this should not be done. It's a misappropriate term. And then coming to the second example, which would make it further clearer, inventory in service context has the property of intangibility that we do understand. Example, seats in movie theater could be considered inventory, but can be better labeled as like unused capacity, occupancy rate, etc. But basically it is inventory. And going back to the movie theater example, unused seats in a movie theater could be considered inventory for which there is no demand, means cash left on table. Fine. So see how inventory is different. We can reduce inventory easily when we talk about manufacturing, but how you're going to reduce inventory here? Because it depends upon the demand. You can't just pick up and throw some seats out of the movie theater. Fine. How we understand the concept of inventory is how we approach it. In both examples, on one hand, inventory should be reduced but on the other hand inventory ought to be satisfied or filled up. So in both these examples you can see that on one hand in lean we learn that we need to reduce inventory, but here in both these examples, here the need is that we should try to satisfy this inventory or fill up this inventory. So can you just for now can you figure out what's the difference between when we talk about inventory in manufacturing context and the service context? So before we move further, let's understand the differences between services versus manufacturing and how inventory is present in both of these. Fine. So in service business, there is a simultaneous production and consumption, that is co-creation between producer and consumer, like the person is giving his service and another person is taking that. But in manufacturing business, consumption and production are at different stages. For example, a car may be manufactured, but then it is not simultaneously that a person is standing there and he is seeing everything and then he will take it home, right? So it is different. Many critical aspects are intangible, that is you cannot see those critical aspects when we talk about the service inventory, and many critical aspects are tangible, we know that by now. Concept of inventory may not be material. When we talk about services, it is not material. It can be virtual, such as requests. Now there could be requests through emails, other things like requests, healthcare, patients waiting for service. So all these things are not, the concept is not material, fine. But here when we talk about manufacturing, it is usually about inventory, buffers, it is about materials. And then considerable variability in service industry. So variability is there is lot of variation, but there is some variation when we talk about manufacturing business, that is in using these service. When we talk about inventory, there is variation. Open universe is a variety of service cases, that is there is infinite choices, but close set in variety in product and manufacturing. So if you are producing certain kind of product, so you know these are the materials, so it is not infinite, fine. Then these are when we talk about service businesses, so inventory is substantive and peripheral at benefits, right, but here mainly substantive product benefits can be seen. So now there is one principle which we can call as use and consume principle to understand how inventory is different when we talk about services and manufacturing. So this principle is used to understand what an inventory in process is, right. Every process there are things which get used and there are items which get consumed, that we understand by now. So there are certain things which are used and certain things which change their form and they get consumed. So taking the consume part first, so those items which transform and change their shape, form and state as a part of the process are consumed. Example, in manufacturing a car you would be using lot of things like steel, plastic, cloth, alloy, and all that changes its shape and then finally car is ready. So things are getting consumed. But in service context, items which get consumed may not be a physical transformation. So you won't see a physical transformation in them, but their state may change. For example, if you are filling up, you are in a mortgage business, so the status of the form would remain same. It won't change its state physically, but it can change from an unapproved state to an approved one. So now you understand how there is different of how the things are consumed differently when we talk about manufacturing and in services. So coming to the use part, in contrast, used items are those which are required during the processing but do not transform by the end of the process, right. So when we were talking about the consumed thing, they get transformed, but the used parts don't transform. So example, same in case of car manufacturer, such items could be people, machines, etc. And in case of services in mortgage processing, typical items which get used include people, computers, infrastructure and so on. So they are being used but they are not being consumed. So use and consume principle helps us to understand how inventory is being used and how it gets transformed and what is the role of the inventory. So what is important now? Why we need to understand this principle is that once we talk about inventory in service context, it is very important that your employees or you should understand and appreciate the inventories in the service processes. It is the first step towards waste optimization. That is, if you really want that your waste should be reduced, whether you are in manufacturing or in services, so specifically in service context, you need to understand what exactly is inventory. Fine. So typical examples of inventory in service context which you will find are emails, files, data, documents, information, electronic reports and documents. So all this is inventory. Now I don't think so you would have ever thought about inventory in these terms, but this is the inventory when we talk about typically in service context, right? So, to identify inventory in service processes, you have to question and see if it is being consumed. And if your answer is yes, then you need to your target should be inventory reduction. Fine. So there are two types of inventory when we talk about take it in service context. So this when we talk about service inventory, it has two types. One is facilitating goods and the another one is work storage based on information. So now what are these facilitating goods? So materials or items which are purchased or consumed by buyer and or provided by the customer. Example, food items in plain, legal documents given along the these are the basic services which are provided along the core services. Now when you are flying, so basic service is that they are carrying you from one place to another, but they also provide you with food, they also give you food. So this is also a service. And same way legal documents, right? So when you are like renting a home, you are buying a place, so these are the legal documents which are provided with the core service. And then the second form of inventory in service context is the work storage based on information. So this type of inventory where some amount of work is completed and stored for customer before customer demands it. Example, when unlike in manufacturing, when we talk about the physical products are stored, service inventory is based on work storage and is viewed as all process steps required to be completed before the customer comes. So yes, it reduces the waiting time. Obviously, if you just have all the forms ready and the customer just has to fill in, so it would reduce the waiting time. These steps are completed in anticipation of the customer demand. So let's take up examples both for facilitating goods in service organization and work storage based on information, right? So here I am giving the name of the service organization, what kind of service organization it is, and here it is a facilitating goods examples, right. For examples, when we talk about retailers, the goods they provide is consumer goods, and then in airline it is foods and beverages. In restaurant, it is prepared or ready to eat food and beverages, and in maintenance and retail store, it is consumer goods and repair parts, right. So these are the facilitating goods in service organization. And when we talk about examples of work storage based on information, then service organization is real estate and work storage is that they have the legal documents ready which you can use. And then publishers which have books and magazines which are printed, and then it's consulting, and again it's forms and reports. Fine. So forms of service industry. So the service organization can have inventory as when we talk about service inventory forms. So the service organizations can have inventory as input service inventory, which is processed to produce output service inventory. Fine, both forms can have inventories of facilitating good type and or information work storage inventory type, right. So here I am going to give you some examples so that you can understand. In services, input form and output form of service industry can be same type or of different type. For example, here I have taken up service industry. This is the input, this is the output, and this is type of the service inventory, right. So first, if we take example of PVR movie tickets, then the input is ticket, output is ticket, and service inventory type is information based. That is, it has the information of what kinds of seats you have, time of the show and all that. Then when we come to bank, so this means the input form and output form is same here in PVR movie tickets. Then when we talk about banks, so they have input as cash or gold, the output is also cash and gold, and this type of service inventory is facilitating goods. So here also the input and output are same. Then when we come to restaurants, so the input is raw food, the output is cooked food, and the type of service industry is facilitating goods. So this is example where the input and output are not same. And same way, if we talk about newspapers, so the input is paper and ink, but the output is the final newspaper, and the type of service industry is information based, right. So inventory is information based. So here again it is an example which shows that input and output is not same. Let's discuss about how to manage inventory and how it's different when we talk about managing inventory in services versus manufacturing sector. Right? In services, it's very difficult to actually anticipate the exact demand of the customer. You can only know when the customer comes to you and he just details out, fine. It is difficult to predict what kind of service or queries or problems a customer will have before actual arrival of the customer to service organization. So this is something different from the manufacturing sector. Like customers know if they want, if for example if they want to buy a car, they have some kind of like things in their mind. They want to buy an SUV, they want to buy a hatchback, the color. So they have some kind of idea. Even the people, the manufacturing people, they know that these are our products and they the actual purchase would be from these products, but it is difficult to anticipate the same things when we talk about the service sector. So so what are the differences in managing inventory when we talk about service sector and the manufacturing sector? So when we have to manage inventory in manufacturing organization, all product is ready. So after product is ready as finished good, customer can use the product. So the product is first it is prepared and then it is used by the customer. So you can decide upon the inventory, you know what is required to make the product, because only after the good is finished the customer is going to use that. But on the other hand, in service organizations, service inventory is used on the customer directly during production of service, that is service encounter. So in service industry, so what happens is that you are using the inventory directly on the customer. And in manufacturing organizations, in situation of running out of inventory, for example you are making a product and you just go out of inventory, so the chances of losing a customer are bit less. Fine, the customer can be disappointed, but they are bit less because first of all in most cases customers only get finished goods, so they don't happen to see what is happening exactly in the manufacturing plant. So even if they run out the inventory, so the chances of losing the customer, the risk of losing customer is lower, and back orders are always possible. So people can just place an order and the company can just prepare it and send it to them. But if we talk about the service organizations, due to unavailability of facilitating goods or materials, service organizations can lose a customer permanently. So this means you have to be ready with everything, because service is directly given to the customer. There is nothing, no wall between them, or there is no space between them. And then in manufacturing, inventory can be stored for later use. Now if you have got excess inventory, so you can use it later, but inventory cannot be stored always. So in service it cannot be stored always. How? I already gave you example. For example, if a flight is flying with like maybe it has a capacity of 300 passengers and the flight is flying with 250 passengers, so 50 seats are left vacant. Now in no case this flight can put these 50 seats into another one, so they will be vacant. You can't store the inventory always. So when we talk about manufacturing sector, it utilizes mostly machine intensive resources, but in service sector it utilizes mostly people intensive resources. So these are the basic differences, and once you understand these differences you would know how to manage the inventory. So coming to managing inventory in facilitating goods and services, so how it can be done? So the facilitating goods inventory can be managed using the inventory models available for managing inventory in manufacturing industries based on the following factors. So there are few factors like they can just manage their inventory as it is managed in the manufacturing, but there are few factors which have to be taken into consideration. First is type of customer demand, right? So based on the demand having such as having trends, cycles or seasonality, you can see what kind of inventory you need. Then based on whether the demand occurs in discrete units or continuous units, you can check that whether this demand is continuous or it is occasional, then you can plan your or manage your inventory. Or highly varying demands, example in supermarkets some products are not sold for like maybe say continuously for 7 days, but on 8th day they just see a bulk of demand of the same product. So this is how you can manage the your facilitating goods service inventory on the types of customer demand. So now that we understand that how we can manage facilitating goods inventory in terms of the customer demand, then comes planning time horizon, that is indefinite stocking of inventory for respiratory sports in the hospital, that you have that indefinite stocking, right? And or temporary stocking of item based on the season's perishability or expiry dates. So you can also plan your inventory like according to this. And then the third factor is the lead time. One is the deterministic lead time, that you are sure that this kind of inventory, that is facilitating good inventory, is required and you store it. And then is the stochastic lead time, which means you cannot determine it to the T, you are not quite sure about it, so you cannot determine it precisely, but on both these factors you can see that how you can manage your inventory, that is the facilitating goods inventory, right? So based on the above factors, inventory models like economic order quantity, also known as EOQ, periodic review policy, continuous review policy, they can be used. And then coming to manage information based work storage service inventory, right? So I told you there are two types of inventories, one is the facilitating goods and another is the work based storage. So now we will see that how we can manage inventory for this type. So in services, it is possible to store some amount of work or perform some process steps before the customer arrives in the form of database or decision supports. Like you can make your forms or like whatever, if it's some kind of a legal thing, or if in hospitals they have their forms ready which the customers have to fill in. This the some amount of stored or compiled work acts as a buffer of resources to match supply with demand. So it's clear. So this work which you have done acts as a buffer between supply and demand. It helps to achieve faster response times and customers do not have to wait for long to get the services done. So this is why we can just do some steps of work so that when the customer comes, the work can be they can be served more quickly. For example, registration forms at hospitals generated by the system automatically, or tools required to set up and run an auctions like on eBay. These are the sites where people run auctions. So the tools are already ready which people can use. So these are examples for the work. These are examples where you can manage inventory on the information based work storage. So now it's important to understand when and how much work regarding service inventory can be stored. Fine. So when a service can be delivered through the application of common processes, this means you have space for storage of inventory. Example, when process is standardized but transaction details are different. And then service organizations, if they entertain frequent and repeat customers, the information regarding repeat customers is stored and utilized from one customer to another. Example is normal, if you just go for online shopping, they will just store all the information, your house address, phone number, etc. So that kind, they can just process your orders faster. Example, Amazon records reviews of the products provided by the customer and all the details of all the products bought by some customer. This is also helpful when there are similar customers and they want to just generate the similar kind of list, that okay, the similar customers also bought these kind of products, so you should just see that. And then service organizations having web portals can store inventory by adding records at small and marginal cost, right. So this is how and how much inventory we can store when we talk about service processes. Then if I have to summarize this complete concept of inventory in the service context, so one thing you need to understand is that a service product can be viewed as a bundle of goods and services, and inventory plays a very important role in services. Providing inadequate service or no service due to unavailability of output material may result in the loss of customer forever. They can just go to some another business. There is no option of back orders when we talk about service industry. So you should be able to make your teams appreciate unseen inventories, especially in the virtual or electronic space, and this can be challenging because ultimately we are talking about lean, we are talking about reducing waste. So that's why I wanted that you should understand all aspects of when we talk about inventory in the service sector, so that you can see where you need to add up and where you want to reduce. But you have to make your teams appreciate that they should understand each and every aspect of what kind of service they are providing and what kind of inventory they are using. And in case you want to, you are seeing that there is unnecessary inventory or there are some problems due to lack of inventory. So without fundamental changes in the process, then you need to work on your processes. Inventory reduction will only provide temporary results and the processes can slide back to a sea of growing inventory. So this is why I took up this topic, so that you can understand in service inventory from all the various aspects, that is what are the kinds of service inventories, what are the two various kinds of service inventories, how much inventory you can store, what are the processes, so that you can understand that how much inventory is required, how much inventory you can keep in logs, and what is the actual wastage which you need to work on, and you just need to get rid of that.